I turned 67 last Tuesday. 67. You'd think after raising 2 kids, after 42 years of marriage, after cooking more meals than I can count, someone would remember. The house was loud that evening. Music playing, silverware clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. But none of it was for me. It was my birthday and not one person said a word. Not even a text. Not even a lazy little "Happy birthday, Mom." That's when I realized something. I wasn't forgotten. I was invisible. I sat on the edge of my bed that morning, staring at the wallpaper I had chosen 31 years ago. Patterns of beige and soft green, floral and calm. It had always felt like a warm hug. Now it felt like a quiet witness to how little anyone seemed to notice me. I ran my fingers over the quilt my late husband Daniel had made. Hand-stitched, every square a memory. Christmas mornings, birthdays, family dinners. The quilt had witnessed laughter and tears, hope and despair. And yet somehow it felt as if all of it had faded into the background. My name is Margaret Thompson. Most people call me Maggie. I've lived in this 2-story brick house in Columbus, Ohio for 31 years. My late husband, Daniel, bought it back when our son was still in middle school. We built everything in that house. Christmas mornings, graduation parties, Sunday pot roasts that lasted all afternoon. The walls had heard every word, every argument, every whispered promise. After Daniel passed 3 years ago, things changed. Not overnight. Just slowly, like a dimmer switch turning down. My son Eric moved back in to help out. That's what he said. Then came his wife Jenna. Then their 2 kids. Somewhere between this is temporary, and it makes sense financially. My house stopped feeling like mine. I remember walking through the living room one evening, just after Eric and his family had moved in. The furniture felt different somehow, like it belonged to someone else. The rug by the fireplace smelled faintly of bleach. The curtains were new, purchased by Jenna, and they blocked out more light than they let in. I paused by the mantel where Daniel's photo sat, framed and smiling, and I almost expected him to stand up and tell me I was imagining things. But there was no one there. Just me slowly learning that the world I had known was slipping away piece by piece. Ever feel like a guest in your own kitchen? Like you have to ask before opening your own fridge? Yeah, that. I started knocking before entering rooms in the house I paid off. I lowered the TV volume in the evenings because Jenna said it gave her a headache. I even moved my late husband's armchair into the basement because it didn't match the aesthetic. I told myself families go through phases. I told myself at least I wasn't alone. But there's a difference between not being alone and not being valued. Some mornings I would make coffee and sit in the sunroom, watching the birds flit in and out of the feeder. Cardinals, sparrows, blue jays, they all seemed to have more attention given to them than I did. I would sip slowly, trying to hold on to a sense of calm, but a quiet ache would settle in my chest. Was this what growing older felt like? Invisible? A shadow in my own life? That Tuesday morning I woke up early. I didn't expect balloons or confetti. I'm not 12. But maybe coffee in bed. Maybe a hug. Maybe a simple "Happy birthday, Mom." I made breakfast instead. Pancakes for the grandkids, egg whites for Jenna because heaven forbid we use butter. Eric walked past me 3 times that morning without a word. Not a card. Not even eye contact long enough to register the date. I remember pausing by the window as I flipped pancakes. The sun was just rising over the trees outside, casting a golden glow across the kitchen floor. It was beautiful, peaceful, a perfect morning for a celebration. And yet, the silence in the house screamed louder than any noise. The sound of laughter I imagined, the clinking of glasses I hoped for. It all existed only in my mind. By 6 that evening, the house got loud. Jenna was dressed up. Music was playing from a speaker in the kitchen. Takeout bags stacked on the counter. For a second, I thought maybe this was a surprise. Maybe they'd been pretending all day. I stood in the hallway waiting for someone to call my name. Nobody did. They were celebrating Jenna's promotion. Apparently, she got promoted at work and that was worth champagne. My 67th birthday? Not worth a candle. I walked into the kitchen and Eric glanced at me like I'd just come home from the grocery store. "Oh hey Mom. We ordered Thai. There's probably leftovers." Leftovers? On my birthday? I nodded because what was I supposed to say? Hey, remember the day I pushed you into this world? So I sat at the end of the table while they laughed and clinked glasses. They weren't trying to be cruel. That's what stung. It was worse than cruelty. It was indifference. Halfway through dinner, Jenna leaned over and said, Margaret, can you grab more napkins? Margaret. Not Mom. Not even Maggie. Margaret. Like I was hired help. I got up quietly and brought the napkins. My granddaughter Emma looked at me with big curious eyes and whispered, Grandma, is today special for you too? I smiled and said, No, baby. It's just Tuesday. But right then something inside me settled. Not anger. Not tears. Just clarity. I thought about the days I had spent baking cookies with Emma, showing her how to knead dough, teaching her how to decorate them with icing and sprinkles. Those moments were full of joy, laughter, and warmth, yet now I felt invisible, as if all the love I had poured into my family had been swallowed by the walls of my own home. I watched Emma nibble on her cookie, and I realized that even if no one else remembered, she did. Somehow that gave me a small sense of peace. This didn't start on my birthday. It started 6 months earlier. I was upstairs folding laundry when I overheard Eric and Jenna talking in the living room. They didn't know I was on the staircase. Jenna said, Once the house is in your name, we can refinance and maybe sell. Your mom doesn't need all this space. I froze. The words hit me like a cold wind. They assumed when Daniel passed, the house automatically became Eric's. They assumed wrong. Daniel was careful. The house stayed in my name. Always had been. I never corrected Eric because I never imagined I'd need to. But hearing them plan my future like I was already gone, that changed something deep inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a fire I hadn't felt since Daniel's passing. I drove downtown the next morning and made an appointment with a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't argue. I just listened, asked questions, and signed papers. Calm. Clear-headed. Wide awake. After that day, I started paying more attention to myself. Little things I had taken for granted became small victories. I took long walks in the neighborhood, noticing the way the sun hit the autumn leaves, the crunch of leaves under my shoes, the smell of damp earth after rain. I bought flowers for the house, not for anyone else but for me. Red tulips and white lilies, my favorite colors. Small acts of reclaiming my space, my time, my life. I also began revisiting old memories, not as a way to dwell on the past, but to remind myself that I had built a life worth remembering. I went through photo albums, laughing at Eric's messy toddler hair, at Daniel's ridiculous Christmas sweaters, at the handmade Valentine's cards I had kept all these years. Each photograph was a reminder that I mattered, that my presence had been a force in shaping the people around me, even if they forgot it now. Back at the birthday dinner, they were halfway through chocolate cake when the doorbell rang. Eric looked annoyed. We expecting someone? Jenna shrugged. I stood up and said, I am. Eric opened the door, and in walked Mr. Collins. Gray suit, briefcase, professional smile. Good evening. I'm here at Mrs. Thompson's request. Mrs. Thompson. Funny how powerful that sounded in my own house. We all sat down. The music was turned off. The kids were sent upstairs. Mr. Collins opened his folder and adjusted his glasses. 6 months ago, Mrs. Thompson updated her estate plan. Eric let out a nervous chuckle. Mom, what is this? I looked at him calmly. I realized I should probably make some things clear while I'm still around to explain them. Mr. Collins continued. The property located at 214 West Briar Lane remains solely under Mrs. Thompson's ownership. Jenna's face went pale. Eric blinked like he'd misheard. Additionally, Mrs. Thompson has decided that upon her passing, the property will not transfer to immediate family. The room went quiet. Not awkward. Not tense. Just stunned. Instead, Mr. Collins said evenly, the home will be sold, and the proceeds will be donated to the Columbus Children's Literacy Fund. Eric shot up from his chair. Are you serious right now? Mom, why would you do that? I folded my hands in my lap. Because I can. Jenna's lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Mr. Collins wasn't finished. Mrs. Thompson also retains the legal right to request the property be vacated within 30 days, should she feel uncomfortable in her own residence. That part was new. I'd added it the week before. Just in case. Eric stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're punishing us," he said. I shook my head. "No. I'm reminding you this is my home." Nobody touched the rest of the cake. Jenna started clearing plates without saying a word. Eric paced the kitchen, running his hand through his hair. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't call them ungrateful. I simply stood up and said, "I didn't need a party. I just needed respect." Then I walked upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about the past 3 years, the quiet erosion of my place in my own home. I remembered Daniel's hands, strong and warm, teaching me to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen. I remembered late nights tucking Eric in, reading stories long after I was exhausted. I remembered laughter spilling over the walls during our first Christmas in this house. And now, in that quiet bedroom, all those memories felt like a shield I could hide behind, a reminder that I had built a life, and I still had control over it. For the first time in 3 years, I felt steady. Not because I took something away from them, but because I reclaimed something for myself. I opened the window and let the evening breeze in. It smelled faintly of rain and pine from the neighborhood trees. I closed my eyes and let it wrap around me. I imagined the house as it had been when Daniel was alive, the warmth, the laughter, the chaotic joy. And I realized I didn't need anyone to validate those memories. I had them. I lived them. And that was enough. The next morning, I woke up to flowers on my nightstand. A card. Breakfast in bed. Eric knocked softly before entering my room. Funny how quickly people remember your birthday when paperwork is involved. I smiled at the card, a small note inside. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Eric." It was the first acknowledgement in years that I mattered. Yet I knew that real acknowledgement should never need legal documents. I spent that morning sipping tea by the window, looking out at the garden Daniel had planted decades ago. The roses were blooming late, stubbornly beautiful despite frost in the mornings. I thought about how I had tended that garden, how I had learned patience and care through the rhythm of planting, watering, and pruning. That garden had grown because of me, and so had I. I realized that sometimes the work you do and the love you give aren't immediately recognized, but that doesn't make them any less valuable. Later that day, I went through the house, opening cupboards and drawers I hadn't touched in years. I found old letters Daniel had written me, tucked away in the back of a drawer. One, written on our 10th anniversary, read, "No matter what changes, this house and this family are ours. Remember, love is the foundation." I smiled. The words were a reminder that ownership wasn't just about property. It was about presence, memory, and the quiet strength of being seen. I spent the afternoon in the sunroom, watching Emma and her little brother play in the yard. I had taught them the rules of tag, how to balance on the stepping stones, how to call out for help when they needed it. They didn't yet understand the dynamics of adults, the way families could drift or fail to notice each other. But I felt a protective pride. I realized that my influence extended beyond immediate recognition. I mattered in ways that weren't always visible. As evening approached, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, remembering all the birthdays Daniel and I had celebrated together. I thought about the little things, the way he always insisted on making a toast, even if it was just for us, the smell of candles and chocolate cake, the sound of Eric's laughter filling the air. Those moments were mine, and they always would be. I realized that celebrating myself didn't require anyone else's approval. I could honor my own life, my own story, and my own presence. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had long ignored. The way sunlight hit the kitchen table in the morning, casting patterns on the floor. The smell of the soil in the garden after a light rain. The soft hum of the refrigerator, which had always been background noise, now a gentle rhythm of life. I realized how much I had stopped paying attention to myself, how much I had let the world move around me without noticing. I spent an entire afternoon in the attic, going through boxes Daniel and I had packed when we first moved in. Old photo albums, letters from friends, birthday cards we had saved over decades. Each item carried a story, a memory of laughter, love, or small victories. I found a card Eric had made in kindergarten, decorated with crayon hearts and misspelled words. He had been so proud of it back then. I held it carefully, smiling through a lump in my throat. These were reminders that I mattered, even if no one currently treated me as such. I began to take long walks in the neighborhood again, something I had stopped doing when life got busy. I noticed the neighbors tending their gardens, kids playing on the sidewalks, and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Each small observation reminded me that life was happening, that I was still a part of it, even if the family in my own house failed to see me. I walked with my head held high, feeling the crisp air against my cheeks and the strength in my legs that Daniel always admired. One evening I prepared dinner just for myself, something I hadn't done in years. I made spaghetti with homemade sauce, sprinkled with Parmesan and fresh basil from my windowsill. I set the table with the dishes Daniel had loved, poured a glass of red wine, and sat alone savoring each bite. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt capable, in control, and alive. I realized that sometimes the most important people to celebrate are ourselves. I thought about the many birthdays I had celebrated in that house. Daniel's surprise parties, Eric's school friends showing up with gifts, the laughter echoing off the walls. I remembered the love that had filled those moments. And now, even though the family seemed indifferent, I could still honor those memories, relive them quietly, and let them strengthen me. The house was still mine. The memories were still mine. My presence was still mine. Later that week, I spent time in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed and journaling. I wrote about the moments I had felt invisible, the hurt, the loneliness, but also the clarity I had gained. I wrote about Daniel, about Eric, about the grandchildren, and about myself. I realized that by putting my thoughts into words, I was reclaiming my narrative. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I was an active participant, acknowledging my experiences and asserting my presence. One rainy afternoon, I went through the kitchen drawers and cabinets, reorganizing them the way I liked. I found mismatched utensils and plates, things I had purchased over the years. I smiled as I touched each item, remembering when Daniel had teased me for buying yet another set of dishes. The house was filled with echoes of the past, and I let myself be comforted by them. This was my home. These were my memories. I was still here. I spent hours that week talking to Emma and her little brother, sharing stories from my childhood, from my time with Daniel, and even small lessons about life. I could see the curiosity in their eyes, the questions they asked, and the laughter that followed. In teaching them, I realized I was leaving a legacy beyond the property or legal documents. I was leaving love, knowledge, and attention that would stay with them long after I was gone. Days after the birthday confrontation, the house felt different. There was a quiet tension, a new awareness that I had reclaimed my place. Eric and Jenna avoided mentioning the papers, but I could feel their nervousness in the way they moved around me. I noticed small gestures from them. Eric holding the door a second longer for me, Jenna pausing before interrupting my conversations with Emma. It wasn't full acknowledgement, but it was a start. I spent one morning in the sunroom, watching the sunlight spill across the wooden floors, tracing patterns like liquid gold. I thought about Daniel, how he would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. I poured myself a cup of coffee, inhaled the warmth, and let the quiet moments sink in. Even in the chaos of family life, there were these small islands of peace. I realized that claiming my presence didn't mean being loud or aggressive. It meant valuing myself, in silence if necessary. Eric approached me that afternoon while I was sorting old letters in the study. He hesitated, clearing his throat. "Mom, about the house," he started, but his words faltered. I looked up, meeting his eyes calmly. "Yes, Eric." He shuffled his feet. I guess I didn't realize how much this meant to you." I held up a hand, letting him pause. There was no anger in my voice, just clarity. "It's not about control, Eric. It's about respect, about being seen. That's all." I could see him processing my words, the weight of years of assumptions slowly shifting. I remembered raising him, teaching him how to ride his bike, helping him with school projects, listening to his dreams and wiping away tears. And now, for the first time in a long time, I realized he was listening in a new way. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need. That evening I sat with Emma on the living room rug, reading a story about a brave little fox who found his place in the world. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, you're brave too, right?" I smiled, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Yes, baby. Bravery comes in many forms, even quiet ones. And it's never too late to start." She nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than her age allowed. I realized that these small moments, these transfers of knowledge and love, were just as important as any legal document or property right. Later that night, I walked through the empty kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator my only company. I thought about all the meals I had cooked, all the conversations that had taken place around these counters, all the celebrations, arguments, and quiet nights of reflection. This house was a living memory of my life. And though others might try to rewrite its meaning, I knew the truth. It had been shaped by love, by care, by presence. That would never disappear. I began keeping a small journal by the bed, writing every day about moments that mattered. Not grand gestures, not family recognition, but simple acts. A smile from a neighbor, a bird landing on the windowsill, a phone call with an old friend. Slowly, it became a record of reclaiming my life, an archive of acknowledgement I gave to myself. It reminded me that my existence was valid, my story mattered, and my life was rich with meaning beyond the approval of others. One Saturday, I invited a few friends from my past over for tea. The house filled with laughter and conversation that wasn't tinged with tension or indifference. I noticed the smell of freshly baked scones mingling with the faint scent of tulips on the table. I watched my friends animatedly tell stories, sharing joy and memory. In that moment, I realized the house could still hold warmth, laughter, and life. It didn't have to belong to others to be full of love. Weeks passed, and the house slowly regained its rhythm. But this time it was my rhythm. I started waking up earlier, enjoying quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper, listening to the birds and the distant hum of the city. I arranged the furniture to my liking, moved the armchair back by the window, and let sunlight pour in where it pleased. The house was mine again. Not just legally but emotionally. One evening, Eric approached me while I was pruning the roses in the backyard. "Mom," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I wanted to apologize. I didn't realize how much I was overlooking you, how much I took for granted." I set down the shears and looked at him, seeing a mixture of guilt and sincerity. "Eric, it's not just about today or even the birthday. It's about awareness, about respect. That's what I needed." He nodded slowly, a little smile breaking through. Jenna too began to change. It wasn't sudden. She still fussed over the decor and the arrangement of the living room, but she started asking my opinions, seeking my input on small things. She even complimented the armchair I had moved back to the corner. Small gestures perhaps, but they mattered. Respect, I realized, often starts with small acknowledgments. I spent afternoons teaching Emma how to bake bread, just as Daniel had once taught me. We measured flour, kneaded dough, and waited for the yeasty smell to fill the kitchen. Her eyes lit up with curiosity and wonder. "Grandma, you're amazing," she said once shyly. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. It wasn't about recognition from everyone, but about the moments that mattered, the love and guidance I could give and see reflected in the next generation. Evenings became times for reflection. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in oranges and purples. I thought about the past, the quiet hurt, and the slow reclaiming of my life. I thought about Daniel, about the memories of birthdays and anniversaries, of laughter and lessons. And I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had stood my ground, reclaimed my presence, and in doing so, I had reminded myself of my own worth. One afternoon, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, and the photo frames. Each item told a story. Each memory reminded me of the life I had built, the family I had nurtured, and the love I had given. I realized that ownership wasn't just legal. It was emotional. I was the keeper of these memories, and that power could never be taken away. The grandchildren began to notice a shift too. Emma and her brother would come to me with questions, seeking advice or stories. They wanted to hear about my childhood, about Daniel, about our family traditions. And I realized that presence wasn't just about being seen by adults. It was about leaving a mark, creating moments that mattered and would linger long after I was gone. Finally, I embraced a new routine of living intentionally. I would take walks, tend the garden, write in my journal, and spend time with those who valued my company. I organized small gatherings with friends, baking, laughing, and sharing stories. The house, once a place of quiet loneliness, became a space of warmth, activity, and personal fulfillment. I turned 67 last Tuesday, and for the first time in years I felt truly seen. I may be aging, I may be softer around the edges, but I am not invisible. The house, the memories, the love I gave, and the respect I claimed, they all belonged to me. And that, I realized, was enough. I was finally at peace, knowing that life, no matter how quietly it unfolds, can always be reclaimed, celebrated, and lived fully. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and like the video if it resonated with you. Your support means the world, and it helps me bring more stories like this to life.